Well, thank you all for joining today's office hours session. We're really excited to have you. I'm Jack Gaspari. I'm the Director of Member Services, and I'm going to be going through a couple housekeeping items before we get started. Today, we have a number of our staff online, but you'll mainly be hearing from Henry Herndon, who is the Acting General Manager, and Deana Dennis, the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for CPCNH. So they will be presenting the core content, and then there should be lots of time for discussions and questions afterwards. A couple things to note there. We ask that you hold questions and discussion items for after the presentation. Like I said, there will be plenty of time to address those. We have Nick Gosling, our communications manager. He will be monitoring the chat, so feel free to add items in there as you see fit. We do record these sessions. We like to make them available for our membership after the fact in case they aren't able to join live. And with respect to that, we have a newly created office hours landing page on our cpcnh.org website. We'll make sure to put that link in the chat. It's a one-stop shop for you to be able to join the Zoom room directly there if you can't find the link, although we'll try to be good about the calendar invitation system for this. You can also view upcoming office hours dates and topics in a dynamic table type format on the page, and see a CPCNH weekly view of our public calendar. And that's also where you'll be able to access past office hours recordings hosted through our YouTube channel. So that content's all made available on that page as well. So highly encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen, pull up the slides, and we'll get started. So you should be able to see that full screen now. Deana, you want to give me a thumbs up? You can? Great. Very good. So I'll go on mute and let you take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Jackson, and good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Deana Dennis. I'm Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs here with CPCNH. Really excited to be here with you all today and kick things off. And in working with Henry and Jackson on preparing this presentation, we thought with all the activity around utility default supply rate setting, and then this newer phenomenon in New Hampshire where the commission had encouraged utilities to propose actually shifting some of their supply cost overruns onto all customers through distribution rate charges. We thought that it would be helpful to provide this regulatory context, and that would be a nice tie-in into the rest of the program for today. So if we can, which will focus on enterprise risk management and business operations, and then a status and outlook of joint reserves, and an overview of the upcoming CPCNH rate setting process. So we can go to the next slide, Jackson. I think that's our agenda slide. Great. So number one, we're going to talk about regulatory and market context here. So if we could go to the next slide. So just as some level setting on what we're talking about around utility default supply procurement, utility default supply rates, what does that really mean? Well, utility default supply rates are what each investor-owned utility in New Hampshire, so that's Liberty, Unitil, and Eversource, it's what they charge for the energy that they procure to supply customers who do not elect to take service from either a competitive electric power supplier or a customer who's not served by a community power aggregation. Of course, in New Hampshire, since 2019, we have two forms of default energy service. We have the default energy service, the traditional default energy service through the utility, and then we also have default energy service on an alternative basis by a community power aggregation. So on the investor-owned utility side, rates for default energy service reflect a pass-through of the costs, the power costs, without a markup or profit for the utility. And that's thanks to the nation-leading electric utility restructuring law that was passed in New Hampshire back in the mid-1990s, which introduced retail market competition, where customers have a choice in where they can receive their electric power supplies from. And part of that law also required utilities to divest in their generation or their power plant assets. So that's kind of how the market got to where it is today. Utility default energy service rates are set based on the customer group, which is usually determined by size. So larger commercial and industrial customers typically have a different rate than the small and medium-sized residential and commercial customers. And before about a year ago, New Hampshire investor-owned utilities contracted with third-party suppliers through a competitive bid process for a fixed price 6-month all requirements contract. And part of that includes a risk premium, because the idea that this all requirements covers all of the utility load, even if there's more load during, let's say we have a really hot summer one year, or there's less demand for electricity than what's forecasted. So this type of service usually comes at a premium cost. So think about your home owner insurance or your car insurance, and it helps protect the utility and its customers from volatility and price fluctuations in the wholesale energy markets. More recently, the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission has been interested in helping to reduce supply costs by having utilities, instead of going through that 6-month all requirements contract, having utilities procure certain percentages of their load into the real-time market or the spot market. And of course, while doing so, there can be some advantages in reduced prices. If you get in and the market is low, there can be some real savings, but it can also have the opposite effect during tight markets when prices are really high. For instance, this past winter, we experienced that. So this period, February 1st through July 31st, all three of the utilities have been directed by the PUC to expose between 30 and 100% of its load to the spot market. For the residential and small customers, it's at 30%. I believe Liberty was at 50% this year. And then for the large customers, it's 100%. But starting this next period, so August 1st, 2025 to January 31st, 2026, all three investor-owned utilities will be moving to 50% spot market for the residential small commercial customers. And as CPCNH expert witness analysis and testimony was conducted earlier this spring by Samuel Golding has shown, this winter has resulted in significant undercollections for utilities. So if we could go to the next slide. So just want to recap some positive developments for the market and for CPCNH and our customers. So late last month, the PUC ruled for fair market competition, and they did this as part of the Unitil proposal to shift about $700,000 in supply costs via its stranded cost charge, which is a non-bypassable distribution rate charge that all customers are paying into. The commission in its order stated that it finds that the prudent approach at this present time would be to maintain the status quo for default service reconciliations for Unitil. So the status quo is that reconciliations, so essentially the net of any under collection and over collection that the utility incurs in a period, that's the reconciliation balance. The status quo was that those reconciliations happen through default service rates. So if there's some unexpected cost or unexpected surplus that happens on the default supply or service side, those costs or credits would go back to those customers that were involved in incurring those costs or benefits. So in the PUC's decision, it directed Unitil to transfer its current deferred reconciliation balance, again, that about just under 700,000 to be assessed in Unitil's upcoming default service rate review, which Unitil will be making its filing today. So we should expect to see that information later today, and we can certainly share around an update with you all if you're interested. So what's important here is that the PUC's decision upholds the longstanding precedent that default service costs should be recovered through default service rates and not shifted through distribution rate charges. And this is really in large part thanks to your all engagement and outreach on both the legislative front and submitting public comments, helping to raise this issue, the awareness among your communities, your local elected leaders, and of course to CPCNH's great work through our expert testimony, analysis, and coalition building. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you for stepping up. And so as a result of this decision last month, the integrity of New Hampshire's competitive market is maintained, and it sets a precedent for similar cost-shifting proposals, such as what to do about the outstanding Eversource $6.5 million under collection case. And we'll talk about that here shortly. So if we could go to the next slide. Great. So just an update, maybe folks remember this whole idea of shifting supply costs through delivery distribution charges came up in Eversource's case last year, and they had suggested that this could be an equitable approach to the commission, and the commission said, yes, we agree. Please give us a proposal for how you would seek to recover these under collections. So back in November of last year, Eversource proposed this essentially a cost shifting proposal to recover $6.5 million in about 2 years worth of default service under collections through its stranded cost recovery charge. Again, it's that non-bypassable charge that everybody served by Eversource, including those here that are served by Community Power and take distribution service from Eversource, you pay that charge. And through CPCNH discovery, analysis, and testimony, we actually identified that there were some rather significant data anomalies or anomalies between the amounts that Eversource had billed for and then what they had actually procured or purchased in the wholesale market. And uncovering these anomalies really uncovered these errors in Eversource's billing and load settlement systems. And as a result, Eversource withdrew that proposal, something that CPCNH and I think every other party, including OCA, the Retail Energy Supply Association, NRG Retail Companies, Colonial Power Group, everybody supported. So that was withdrew, and they amended their proposal back in April. And then in mid-May, the Public Utilities Commission directed that all reconciliation issues, including the $6.5 million, be transferred back into Eversource's, essentially their default service case for this year. So it's positive that these are no longer being considered in the confines of this non-bypassable distribution charge. But then we still have to keep an eye out for what happens in this next docket, this upcoming docket. So CPCNH and others must stay vigilant and engaged in this, the supplemental phase of this docket where that will take place. So on the next slide. Oh, thank you, Jackson. So with the first proposal by Unitil to shift costs being denied, investor-owned utilities, we're expecting them to begin recovering prior under collections through their default service rates, starting with this August 1 rate period. For Unitil, it's likely that they will begin recovering some of the $700,000 in this next rate period, possibly the rest of that in the subsequent rate period. For Eversource, it's likely that they'll begin recovering some of their losses from the August 1 of last year, through July 31 of this year. But that $6.5 million won't be decided until later this year. So that likely won't be part of this next upcoming rate period. And, TBD what the commission ultimately decides with that. And then for Liberty, and one thing to note about Liberty, they have continued to, resist hints and suggestions from the commission to consider this recovery through cost shifting. So they've continued to propose the status quo, that any of their under and over collections be recovered through their default service customers. And in fact, just last week, they made a filing proposing reconciliation of just about $8.1 million in under collections from essentially the last year, August 1 last year through projected July 31 this year, through their default energy service. And I want to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Great. So just a breakdown, because 8.1 million may seem a little alarming or at least significant. So how that breaks down is 3.2 million from the large customer group and about 4.9 or just under 5 from the small customer group. And really big reason for this under collection is that their rates underpriced the market. Again, Liberty was exposing 50%, I believe, for the residential this past period, and then again, 100% for the large customers. So they're a little bit further down the line on the market-based procurement experiment than the other utilities. And what they've done is they've proposed 2 potential reconciliation adders, so how they would adjust for this under collection. And why they propose 2, well, Salem, the town of Salem is launching its community power program, or it's planning to launch its program later this fall. I think it's slated for September of this year. And so the point Liberty is making is that, well, the adder for, reconciling these charges would really wildly swing, depending on whether Salem launches and, of course, the timing of the launch. So they've proposed that if Salem does not launch, for the large customer group, the adder, so this is what would be added to whatever their default energy service rate is for this next period, and they haven't proposed that yet. Their proposal is coming on June 20th, and the commission will decide that at a hearing later in the month. So this would be an additional to that. So for the large customer group, they're looking at about 5 cents if Salem does not launch. And if Salem does launch as planned, it would be 13.5 cents. And then on the small customer group side, about 2 cents if Salem doesn't launch, 4.5 cents if they do launch as planned. So obviously that's a pretty big swing. And perhaps this is the last case of the utility default service death spiral concern. What does that really mean? Well, essentially, you have large under collections and these large reconciliation balances. And if you have customers that are migrating because of either community power or they're sensitive to price, and with this reconciliation, it might drive a lot of the customers off of Liberty default service. So then the question and concern of, well, where do they recover this from? So that is sort of what bore this concept of, well, it may be tolerable to recover those costs, maybe as a one-timer through distribution rates. So again, really the devil will be in the details about, whether and what time Salem launches. There's also risk of, if Salem ends up launching maybe a month or 2 later and Liberty, proposes and gets approval, they could possibly over collect. So then you have the opposite question of, well, what would you do if you had over collected from those customers that are now on Salem community power? How would you rebate them? And then the opposite, if they launch on time, or Liberty under collect, then, what do you do to make sure that those costs are recovered equitably? So with that, on the next slide, I just want to capture a couple of takeaways here. Ultimately, we need to continue to stay vigilant. We've saw through our analysis that greater spot market exposure and utility procurements increases the likelihood of losses and higher reconciliation amounts going forward, especially if rates underprice the market costs. Defending market integrity is crucial. Customers win when they have choice and transparency, and they're not forced to subsidize losses. And then supporting market innovation. Now is the time to advance reforms to accelerate innovation through competitive means, including CPCNH developed New Hampshire Energy Forward Act. And then stay tuned for more in the Eversource case, as well as the other utility default service cases. CPCNH is a party, and we plan to participate in the upcoming filings and hearings. So with that, I will toss it over to Henry, I believe.
Great. Thanks so much, Deana. And Henry will come on. I'll ask folks in this brief intermission before Henry starts, if you could please stay on mute until the end of the session for questions and discussions. We would appreciate that. So thank you. Henry, take it away.
Thanks, Jackson, and thanks, Deana. So I'm going to provide, following on from that regulatory context and some of the sort of changes in the market from a regulatory and utility perspective. I'm going to talk about CPCNH Enterprise Risk Management, our business operations, and provide a bit of an update there, and our reserve status and outlook. Following from that, we'll talk about the rate setting process and look forward to sort of the next 6 to 12 months and beyond. So just to sort of start this, I think it's helpful to highlight how CPCNH operates in the ISO New England power markets and why we're a little bit different from a typical broker or the utilities historically, and perhaps now under the current changes to their methods. But a couple key aspects of this, one being our risk management committee. And we all know CPCNH is, governed by 4 members on our board and on our committees that advise the board. We had an annual meeting recently, and there were some, changes to different committee structures and whatnot. We have a really good and strong community-led risk management committee. Peter Kulbaki is the chair of our committee. He's the director of public works in the town of Hanover, and sort of pioneered a model where Hanover was, I think, the only municipality in the state that was a direct participant in the wholesale market, and he was managing some of that procurement. So he has a lot of power market expertise. Chuck Willing, he's an attorney from Concord working on renewable energy contracting and has some industry experience. Of course, Clifton Below, a key leader in a number of different policy affairs. James Mashall is an energy storage industry professional. Michael Prang, MIT PhD in mathematics and a really sharp community representative on that committee. And then Nick Devonshire from Exeter, who has a background in energy project finance. So really strong committee, and there's a lot of work happening in the risk management committee right now, and lots of trainings and things like that. And I just wanted to highlight that excellent team. CPCNH, of course, has an enterprise risk management policy, looking at our rates policy, our risk management policy, and our financial reserves policy, which I'll talk about a little more on some upcoming slides. And CPCNH practices active portfolio management, which again is different from this fixed price load following lock in the rate for 6 months, and also different from just taking specific amounts of market exposure, but monitoring the market and adjusting the portfolio over time in response to changing market conditions. On the back end, analytics, probabilistic forecasting of loads, and obviously hedge limits and requirements there to feed into our transparent rate setting and cost allocation and reserve accrual for the benefit of member communities. Next slide. So enterprise risk management policy. When we say enterprise risk management policy, we're talking about the combination of portfolio risk management, the retail rates policy, and the financial reserves policy. These things, these 3 components come together to create our enterprise risk management framework. And it's an important guiding tool to protect CPCNH set guardrails on how we buy power in the markets, create clarity among all the members in our rate setting process and what kinds of rates we can offer customers, and how financial reserves will be accrued, how they will be maintained, their purpose, their uses, and how they are tracked across the membership. So these three policies come together to create that clarity for our operations and provide a number of different benefits, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So the purpose of enterprise risk management policy, sort of at a high level, from the policy comes the power agency evolution of CPCNH and comes the value that we can create for the membership. So that evolution, having the risk policy, having thought through all the details on how we manage risk, how we set rates, how we accrue reserves and achieve targets. These support our diversification. They support the organization to diversify secure credit facilities, diversify our suppliers that we're trading with and the different kinds of products that we can trade to create more value there. And eventually part of CPCNH's strategic goal has been to become a sort of a self-sufficient enterprise, register in the wholesale market with ISO New England, be our own load-serving entity, and become more independent and reduce costs in that way. Additional benefits of the policy and sort of CPCNH as a whole is best practice and knowledge transfer. So we benefit from decades of industry knowledge and experience in this industry, and that knowledge can be transferred and is being transferred quite rapidly to all of the members, to the communities, so they can use it to their benefits. Training and building capacity of committees, board, and staff. Being the nonprofit community governance entity that we are, education and community engagement is a critical aspect of what CPCNH does. And those capacities are very much being built at the board, committee, and staff level, and looking forward to over time bringing perhaps certain portfolio management capabilities in-house as we move forward. The policy helps CPCNH set rates accurately, accrue our reserve funds, manage our risk, and optimize our financial performance. This is a marketplace where energy suppliers can and do go bankrupt, and the policy is intended to protect CPCNH from those worst case outcomes. Also, through portfolio management, we can have more price competition, and we can increase margins or net revenues or joint reserves of the members. And then really eventually creditworthiness and building of new renewable generation assets and harnessing distributed energy resources for our competitive advantage. So we see more mature community power markets becoming stable counterparties for developers to sign long-term power purchase agreements, put new steel in the ground, renewables, energy storage, and really be the leaders in developing the local power market in accordance with what is beneficial to the local community and what really generates value for them locally, giving them a seat at the decision-making table in that. Part of that is innovative rates as we evolve, harnessing demand flexibility, harnessing, net metering solar or other local resources that could help us to shave peak or shift peak time costs or empower customers to be better recognized for the value that they provide to the system. And then part of this is, CPCNH and our municipal membership have revenue bonding authorities under New Hampshire law, which can be a mechanism to provide financing for these kinds of projects in the longer term. So some context for sort of a quick history and context of our business operations and our reserve status. Very much so, community power is delivering on the purpose and intent of the market, having been up and running for a couple of years now. The market is driving competitive rates and innovation. I think we see that reflected in some of the material Deana discussed and the ways there's been some changes with the regulators and with the utilities, perhaps elsewhere. So driving that competition in rates, driving that innovation, generating real savings for customers, more than $20 million since the launch of the organization, accruing community reserve funds, and then sort of getting into the beginning stages of developing local energy projects, renewable projects, community solar projects, particularly with the recent approval of Poverty Plains, which is in process. This is a 5-megawatt community solar array that is scheduled to be constructed and go live in Warner, just off of I-89. Hopefully we can see it from the highway there sometime in 2026. So that's a first step towards sort of the objective and local policy goal of a number of members, which is to build more local renewable generation assets. So this winter period, Deana talked about, some of the market context and some of the utility context. CPCNH experienced a drawdown of its reserve this winter period, winter 2024 through spring 2025, due to power supply costs exceeding revenues. Next bullet. Definitely lots of lessons learned quickly at CPCNH, and really focusing on the importance of the enterprise risk management policy. Contributing factors to the draw included deviation from certain aspects of that policy and rate setting in our hedging and closing our positions as opposed to having market exposure, and in ensuring adequate reporting to oversight committees and the board so they can have the best available information, range of possible outcomes, and be informed about the magnitude of risks associated with different types of decisions. Sort of simply put, CPCNH's rates, not dissimilar to what we talked about with some of the utilities, they underpriced. We had underpriced rates and we had market exposure in a particularly expensive winter market. So next bullet. And then again, very quick action from CPCNH leadership and staff, and action towards business restructuring. So things like enforcing hedge ratio compliance, the construction of new tools and systems that are enabling informed decision making for rate setting and budgeting. Particularly the probabilistic cash flow model is a new tool recently constructed by our consultant at Community Choice Partners, Samuel Golding, which has been very valuable in ensuring that all decision makers are fully informed when we make decisions and forecast our reserves and set rates and our budget. There's been a lot of business restructuring and upgrades to data systems, revamping of our load forecast model to improve the integration of some of the wholesale and retail customer data to inform the ways in which we are forecasting, and then trainings to ensure that the risk management committee is up to speed and really understands these tools that we are working with. And there's a great schedule of trainings. I think there's 5 or 6 this month for our board, staff, and committees, particularly the risk management committee. And we're very appreciative of our partners at Ascend Analytics, who are running the majority of those trainings. And then, activity to ensure we're breaking down silos. We have good coordination across the organization, and we have improved reporting. And again, sort of horizontally at a personnel level and from personnel to board, clarity of information and alignment so we can make the best decisions. Next slide. Okay, status and outlook of joint reserves. CPCNH's reserve accrual peaked at perhaps $11.5 million in mid-2024. And starting in Q3 of 2024 and moving through Q1 of 2025, this was the period during which our costs of power exceeded the rates charged to customers, and the reserves were largely depleted during that period. Starting in Q2 2025, early in April, rates have been set to cover costs, and we have a gradual reserve growth and build moving forward. As of April 2025, the joint reserves stood at roughly $400,000, excluding forecasted resettlement costs for the prior months. And we're forecasting, based on rate setting, or subject to rate setting, joint reserve accrual of $7.8 million by the close of the year. This is an accrual forecast, not a cash forecast. It's an important distinction there. So yeah, cash on hand is different from joint reserve accrual under current policy, in that just the nature of the business being costs are incurred perhaps 45 to 60 days prior to revenues being received for those costs. So looking out slightly further, Q1 to Q2 2026, current forecasts are showing perhaps cash draws anticipated to cover those winter expenses, renewable portfolio standard compliance, things of that nature, while maintaining healthy reserve accrual. And looking forward to Q3 2026 and onwards, we expect reserves to really stabilize and build towards the minimum and target levels moving forward from there. Next slide. So this is recapping the history from a rate graphic perspective, you can kind of see the red line, of course, being CPCNH's rate relative to the utilities, and then these horizontal fixed prices being some of the broker-supported community power programs. And yeah, the period we're sort of been discussing is this uptick in CPCNH rates here and the lower utility rates with greater market exposure. And it will be interesting to see again. We may know today what Unitil proposes for its utility supply rates, with the other utility rates soon to follow thereafter. Generally speaking, market futures and forwards indicate an upward tick in rates. Next slide. This is just a sketch of a rate setting calendar. So we are on this June 6th date in our office hours on schedule. And again, we expect that Unitil will propose rates to the commission today. So maybe in the Q&A, someone will jump in and let us know if that's happened or not. We have a couple of risk management committee meetings this month, and these yellow boxes on the 19th and the 20th are when we expect Liberty and then Eversource to propose rates. CPCNH will have its joint meeting of its risk management and finance committees on the 23rd. This is an open meeting. We invite public comment during those meetings. There will be proposed rates for the period, and there will be a deliberation by the committees on those proposed rates a couple of days in advance of the June 26th board meeting, when we anticipate the board will adopt rates for the period effective starting August 1 and running through January 2026. That is the process. And moving to the next slide, I think we are ready to shift and have a Q&A and discussion if folks have questions and comments.
I'm seeing a couple hands raised. I believe I saw Terry Clark's hand go up first, but I also just wanted to briefly say thanks, Deana and Henry, for your presentations. I'm sure the membership found that valuable and that there will be lots of questions and discussion generated from these topics. So appreciate you guys sharing. So yeah, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, could you go back one slide, the final slide with the timeline, with the calendar there? Yeah, okay. So Cheshire Community Power is going to have a meeting with its member towns to discuss, well, number one is to announce to them what the default adder that we had last period netted for each one of the towns. And I wanted to do it and time it so that in the unlikely event that we want to discuss another adder, would the 24th and the 25th be the dates that I should hold those meetings to get any changes in Cheshire Community Power's program?
Yeah, I think that would be I would advise that would be appropriate, and just keep in close communication with us and perhaps Jackson to let us know about that meeting and any results of it so we can implement that program if you'd like or not.
Yeah, so if we did make any decisions, then you folks need to know about it on the night of the 25th, right?
Yeah, so technically the language in the rates policy is that members are to notify CPCNH of changes in default rates prior to or during the board meeting at which rates are adopted. We're assessing the policy right now, and in the next couple of months, we'll perhaps be looking at certain amendments. That might be one that we tweak just because there has been what if it's still a little chicken and the egg, sometimes communities want the day of the board meeting or maybe another day after to make that decision. But yes, if you could have that decision ready prior to the board meeting on the 26th, that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I believe the next hand I saw was from Beth McGuinn. Go ahead, Beth.
Thanks. My question is similar to Terry's. I have not. I'm a new representative for the town of Canterbury and haven't run this through the select board, although I've sat through the process. Can you walk us through that portion of this calendar? What are the responsibilities of the representatives in communicating to the select board and back to CPCNH regarding rates?
Yes. So depending on your cost sharing agreement, you may have an authorized officer who can make certain decisions. I expect more likely is that your select board would have to make a decision if you wanted to change your default rate. And you will know CPCNH proposed rates on Monday, the 23rd, and those rates will be formally adopted, or whatever rates are adopted will be adopted on the 26th. So the 23rd, 4th, and 5th would be a good time to be prepared to discuss with the proper authority, perhaps the select board. And we do provide a template letter we'll be putting out to all the members that clarifies this process. If any town just wants to take the lowest cost granted basic option as their default and offer the others as opt-ups, no action is required.
Yeah, I guess I'll just add on to that and say that, some communities have, to give themselves more time, made a decision with a clause in it that sort of dictates how they want to implement rates depending on what CPCNH rates are compared to the prevailing utility rates. So that is something that you could do if you're bringing this to a select board earlier. Say, hey, we'll have a local product, for example, that will be in place on a default basis if such thing happens, or not if such thing happens, or so that is an option, to give yourself a little more time, and we're happy to support conversations about that.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, I believe I saw maybe Joe Lamatina next. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, mine's just more of a comment. I have a concern about launching any new communities, especially something the size of Salem, um, during this, while we're trying to stabilize our rates. Just a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just to clarify that point. So Salem Community Power is not affiliated with CPCNH. There's another firm working with that community. They're not part of the CPCNH membership.
Yep, that's correct. And to further discuss that point, we don't have any expectation, and are not planning to launch, a large group of communities until maybe, about a year from now at the earliest. So that would be spring
Okay,
2026.
All right, thanks. That was my original understanding, and then
Yep.
when I saw that, I said, "What the heck?" Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
no, and yeah, appreciate you asking that clarifying question or making that point. Bruce Tucker.
Yeah, back to the rate setting question. When we did it last time, we had the option of submitting our final proposal for default and rate after the meeting closed, but before the end of the day. Is that still an option?
So technically, the language of the policy says prior to or during the board meeting at which rates are set. Again, it's sort of maybe a flaw in the policy as a detail. So I that could occur, and we might just ask the board to sort of acknowledge they're making that exception to that minor detail in the policy.
Okay, so I should ask for an exception then.
Yeah, Bruce, and yeah, I think that what Henry said is totally appropriate there. The real concern is, this does happen on a tight schedule. We acknowledge that. We have to have the rates posted on the first to meet, our legal obligation through RSA 53E. So, there's a pretty tight turnaround for the member services team to ensure that happens appropriately. So essentially we have, the 27th and the 1st. So we definitely need things in hand by, end of day on the 26th at the latest.
Right. Well, I'm sure our intent will be to do the provisional proposal.
Good. I know that there are likely a number of comments or questions in the chat as well. Because I'm sharing my screen, I'm having a little trouble seeing that. So Nick, I might call on you to go through that. But before we get to the chat, I guess I'll call on Steve Holmgren from Durham if you want to ask your question or make your comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jackson. It looks like from what you were describing about the different utilities and what they may be doing to recover costs, we could see quite a spread of different pricing from the utilities, if I'm getting that correctly. In which case, does CPCNH anticipate we're going to have to set utility-specific rates this time?
That's a very good question. I can't say what the spread might be. I think we just have to wait to see some more information from Unitil and Eversource in particular. We are revisiting and taking a hard and more detailed look at cost allocation and cost causation. Different communities based on customer makeup or usage patterns or other factors have different cost to serve. And so that sort of shakes out in the rate within the rate. If you have the same rate for all those different towns, some may have higher or lower costs within that rate and therefore higher or lower contributions to reserve fund. So we are in process of doing analysis there. This is part of our revamp of our community benefit reporting and getting more accurate cost allocation reporting to the membership. And we have discussed that there is flexibility and there are different options for how rates are proposed and set. But I can't say definitively at this time. And again, this part of this is, understanding, well, how much of the cost drivers are capacity tags associated with the commercial customers in the customer base or a given town, and ensuring rates are allocating costs to the correct customer class.
There may be some follow-up comments or questions about that. I briefly do want to highlight a couple of comments made in the chat, which I think are relevant to the conversation. Todd Selig, who's the administrator for Durham, notes that Durham has a standing policy to select the CPCNH plan with the highest renewable content, so long as the rate is below the Eversource default rate. So I believe that would apply to making Granite Plus the default product for Durham if that is less than the Eversource default rate. So I think that's good to mention. And then Dave Hemingway points out that, there is a bit of a common misunderstanding, due to how many communities are involved with CPCNH. Sometimes people think of community power as synonymous with CPCNH, but it's a concept and a legal framework, and that, many other communities have done this through different approaches, utilizing a couple of broker options out there. So I'm not seeing additional hands at this time. Feel free to come off of mute. Oh, I see a hand from Paul Panish. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, this is a more theoretical question, I guess, going back to Deana's conversation. Given that the investor-owned utilities aren't allowed to make a profit off of default rates, Eversource at least seems pretty opposed to community power aggregations. Do we understand why that is? Are we confident that their cost I mean, obviously they made a mistake in their cost calculations, but are we sure that they aren't doing creative bookkeeping in the background in some way? I just am wondering if there's any general comment on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I have perhaps a thought or two. When their legislation was moving through the House in 2021, I believe, there's an aspect of the legislation that is focused on retail functions. The optionality for community power to offer programs, efficiency programs, demand response programs, metering, data collection, some of these sort of retail market infrastructures that I suppose the intent of the restructuring law was to create competition in wholesale and retail markets, and we were successful in the wholesale market, but many of the infrastructures required to create real competition and real price signals in a retail market remain monopolized and have not been modernized. So there was a lot of resistance from Eversource at that point in time to looking at the ways in which community power might compete more with retail pricing, rates, innovation, efficiency, demand response. And again, the utilities currently administer the energy efficiency programs of the state. Again, like not a natural monopoly, but the current construct. So that's perhaps one aspect. And then, this is perhaps more speculative, but there's it's well, one that the utility is responsible for managing and maintaining the distribution system, and that's a critical job. It's a critical infrastructure. It's difficult. It's important for all of our societal functions, and it has to be managed and maintained. So there's like I think a caution in the incumbent entity in ensuring that it's carefully managed. And maybe part of that gets into, well, if you have lots of distributed energy resources interconnecting, this causes changes. We have to adapt. We have to engage with that. And then again, one aspect of what CPCNH wants to achieve, and what I think many of the member cities and towns want to achieve, is if you are able to develop a local energy economy and actually realize the value of sub-ISO New England power resources, local generation assets, battery storage that are load reducers, that are defraying our wholesale energy costs, our wholesale capacity costs, the transmission costs associated with shipping that power in through the federally regulated interstate lines. Some of these things, transmission, it's a profit center for Eversource. So if you have greater local energy economy, I don't know, there's potentially some competition there or trade-offs between, are we building wholesale top-down resources? Do we have a sort of local distributed market economy? I don't know. These are just sort of concepts that your question prompted for me. I don't know if it's an exactly direct answer, but
Yeah, thanks, Henry. Those are very interesting thoughts. I appreciate that.
Great.
I'd like
Bruce, oh, go ahead, Deana.
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in and add that to answer your question, Paul, as it relates to the 6.5 million in under collections or losses stemming from the accounting errors in Eversource's IT systems, that was not felt uniquely by one entity or one group of customers. That was felt on Eversource's own large and small default customers, and then it impacts also on other competitive supplier customers, and then also on some community power customers as well.
Yeah, thanks, Deana.
Right. Yeah, thank you for that additional comment, Deana. Go ahead, Bruce Tucker.
Yes, is there a way for us to learn the utility rates that are proposed before the last minute?
We could perhaps do some communications on it. Right now, I'm kind of just imagining Deana and Cliff are refreshing the docket pages on the days we think they're coming out. But it's a good comment. And yeah, maybe we can go internally and say, hey, make sure we're letting the members know the latest info when we've got it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, CPCNH is an intervener, a party to all three of the investor-owned utility cases. So we will know exactly when they file it because we will be on the service list, and certainly happy to coordinate with Henry Jackson and team on, finding a way to communicate that information out to members.
All right. Well, appreciate all of the great questions and comments. It's really helpful to have a discussion driven by our membership. So thanks for your time in attending and your engagement. I guess I'm not seeing any hands or anything else in the chat at this time, so I'll put it out, I guess, a last call for hands or comments before we wrap up. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank you all again for joining the office hours session today. We will continue to update you throughout the rate setting process. And I know that's of great importance to everyone. So we'll make sure that we're supporting you in the ways that you need to be supported. I'm glad to see some positive comments related to this session in the chat. Appreciation again to Henry and Deana for their time spent in preparing slides for this. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. So take care all.